Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the podcast. We're still down here in Atlanta, and I have the distinct pleasure to be here with Nick McQuire, CEO of GEMA and former analyst at Mobilecast, really, at IDC. And Nick, introduce yourself.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Brian. Good to be here. This is my first mobile podcast. This is a truly great experience with this microphone in front of me. I feel really cool. So I'm the CEO of the Global Enterprise Mobility Alliance, which is an independent joint venture made up of leading local managed mobility specialists from across the world that are getting together on a common platform to sell to multinationals managed mobility services. So, and to Brian's point, I formerly led enterprise mobility research for IDC based in London, UK. So it's an absolute distinct pleasure to be here, Brian.
So, we're going to talk a little bit about GEMA and all that, but before we do that, I want to hit a little bit on your analyst roots. So you did that for 10 years or so?
Yeah, well, I did a couple stints. I started at Yankee and then went work for BT Global Services for a number of years and then came back to IDC. So I think in aggregate it was about 10 years.
So you have a lot of experience in the industry, and we're going through some really turbulent changes now.
Tell me about it.
So, if you look at it, when you left, Blackberry was still at least alive. Microsoft wasn't so much alive. You had Apple, Samsung was really just, coming up and doing their thing. And, nowadays we see Apple and Samsung at the forefront. We have iOS and Android, and we got Microsoft, just bought Nokia. And, they've pulled into third above BlackBerry here as far as, current selling, not told devices yet. And we have BlackBerry claiming an auction. I mean, what's it look like to you? Now that you've moved out of the analyst, but it's still in there. I know it.
Yeah, it's still deep in the heart. I missed it already. It was May 1 that I started at GEMA, so it's still lingering. How I look at it, it's incredible, isn't it? I mean, one of the advantages actually of being in the UK is you get a slight different vantage point, right? Because of the way in which you look, and obviously at GEMA as well, we're in the multinational space, so we've got representation from a lot of the regions of the world where you've got a slightly different story going on around a lot of these different vendors, right? And so you roll that up, it's still a really difficult, when you net all that out, it's still really difficult to create, to kind of get an overall picture. But I think with respect to BlackBerry in particular, I think what I think is fascinating is when you can look at the corners of the world where BlackBerry operate, right? I mean, and obviously it's always been really difficult here. For the past number of years, it's getting harder here. But you look at the places like the Middle East, right? And they're still doing really well there. I mean, enterprises are still heavily BlackBerry. Yeah,
but you're also from the UK, and UK BlackBerry is huge with kids, with teens and everything else. Is it going to stay? Is it staying that way? I mean,
it's a good question because I would say 2 years ago, yes, I think you're starting to see changes. You really are. I mean, it's not as, I suppose, Google and Apple centric as it is here. You still get a lot of the really, I would say the older BlackBerry models, the Curves, these sort of things on very cheap data plans. Frankly. And you see the kids running with them. They're prepay as well, and you go on the buses and you see the BBMs flying. And that was always very common, in London in particular. Now that is slightly starting to change already. It's amazing how quickly it changes at that level, in the marketplace. But at the same time, it's still a little bit different, right? And then you go into places into Asia Pacific as well, and it's
BlackBerry's huge.
Completely different scenario. So how this balances out is the real question, right? And how the success. There was a company that I think we had this conversation last night over a few beers, but my memory's hazy now. But
you said you didn't want to talk about last night.
I got abuse from you last night, so I'm raising it now just so that I can defend myself. But there was one company I was speaking to last year. one company I was speaking to last year had 200,000 Blackberries in its fleet still. So there are companies out there with a big dependency.
Hey, it's interesting. I was talking to of someone who was here at the conference, and they're a major firm, which we also talked about last night, but I won't say their name because I didn't ask them before I said this information, but they have over 20,000 Blackberries.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, we're not going up anymore. We used to be going up unbelievably fast. And I'm sorry, 200,000 Blackberries. We may even be the same company. Wow. So we used to be going up really, really fast, and now we're seeing them fall. Yeah. Now they're not falling at 1,000 at a time or anything, but he said we're falling 100 to 200 a month, and it's accelerating. Yeah. And that's where it starts to become interesting. But one of the things having you here, which would be kind of neat. In the U.S., and a lot, we have listeners in the U.S., but we have listeners all over the world. And one of the things that people in the U.S. probably don't get is there aren't subsidies in a lot of countries outside the U.S. And that's something you're much more familiar with and can probably speak to about how they kind of sell phones outside of the U.S.
That's it. Absolutely. I mean, and you got to look at the total picture. I mean, it's in certain markets the lack of subsidies, so obviously price points on the hardware are very important. But it's the data plans as well, right? And you talk to some of these organizations where they got employees spread all over the world. I mean, 30, 40, 50 countries, tens of thousands of employees in, these multiple countries. And you're looking at your options, right? You've got your BES infrastructure already in place. You've made that investment, years ago. But, your employees are moving around, and when you think about also the engagement that these companies have had with their carriers over that period of time, only on BlackBerry. Imagine those conversations of every 2 years or a year those data plans are renewed and those BlackBerries are renewed by the carrier, and each year they get beaten down to the point where they're actually really cheap. They're really cheap and they're really predictive. It's like fixed line. And so I think when you got these companies that have got these number of BlackBerries still in the fleet, there's a reason for that, right? Because they are cheap. So
we see it. I've seen companies, and I won't say names, but certainly in Asia and other places where they may be all iOS in other spots or iOS and Android, and they get to Asia, and it's a matter of the BlackBerries are so much cheaper, and these guys have a fixed budget. So say you have to go this, and they turn around and say, great, but we can only outfit half our workforce.
That's right. Yeah.
We're going to stick with BlackBerry, and so let's keep going with BlackBerry then, and we'll get back to subsidies in a bit. BlackBerry said they want to have this auction by November, and I look at them and I see really two businesses. Some people say three. I see the BES business, and then I see their handset and their OS business.
Right.
And
as one, basically.
As one basis. So you have the handset OS is one business.
Yeah.
That I can see. We talked about this last night. And I said, who would buy these two businesses? And on the, for me in the conversation we had, and there are a couple other people with us, I think we settled that the handset OS business might actually go really well with Amazon, just for the fact that they've had some issues with finding people to make a device for them.
Right.
But where do you see their handset? Who else do you see out there for that?
That's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, the immediate thought is a lot of the Asian PC manufacturers are trying to get into mobile, right? That's where people start. But then that gets complicated because some of them, you think about the Canadian government and the ownership and the restrictions there of foreign ownership into Canada in certain geographies of Asia Pac, and does that slow a deal down? Who knows? You can only speculate on that. But that's clearly one path that people think is a viable option. But there aren't that many options there. Who you're thinking of? You're thinking of Lenovo's in the press. I mean, some of these others. So I don't. That's one route. I'm not sure. Do you then say, okay, what's the valuable asset there? I mean, clearly it's the OS, right? So therefore, where does the OS take you? And if the OS takes you into the pervasive computing, you're getting into other, other industries, automotive, with Internet of Things, whatever that be. I mean, obviously QNX has got a heritage in other verticals as well that could be exploited. I think that piece is really attractive. It's the kind of hardware manufacturing facilities that BlackBerry have, or the way in which they do the manufacturing, that there will be an asset base there that will need to be, either someone will want it and roll it up into the OS, or they'll actually want it carved off. Who knows? You could speculate. But I agree with you. I think there's two real debating points around, okay, if BlackBerry is going to be bought, and who's looking at BlackBerry at the moment. They're going to be looking at those main bits of it. But they're two separate value propositions.
So let's look at the second one. So the second one would be BES. And, when we talk about BES, there's the NOC, so the Network Operations Center. So for those that don't know how BES works, they have their own NOC. You actually send your traffic through BlackBerry's NOC and through the carriers and back, and they can do compression. They do security. That's the piece that the governments and everything else like, because they can keep things, the DoD looks at that, it's protected data. Who looks at that? I mean, what my opinion is, but let's see,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got...
and there's that, it's the management piece around BES as well. It's
correct. Yeah.
It is MDM. It's they bought the stuff for Fusion. They have this, and there are a ton of people who need MDM right now that don't have it.
Well, at its baseline, that BES combined NOC architecture. Okay, I mean, there's the management front end piece of it. Let's put that aside for a moment, because that's a different dialogue.
Animal.
That's a different dialogue, really. But the underlying architecture and infrastructure for the NOC that's transport, isn't it? It's secure transport of data, and so who's interested in that? Who would a carrier be interested in that wants to sell the enterprise? Technically speaking, I'm not the engineer. How much can you run through that architecture and that infrastructure and still preserve a really good user experience on mobile? I mean, from my and also, frankly, as well, which is slightly, the opposite, is also the good cost economics of data as well that the NOC infrastructure brings, because of the compression and the engagement with the carriers and the contracting with the carriers in all these markets as well. So
and that was a point you brought up last night. So I don't want you to just gloss over that. You were talking about the fact that the the deals and the rates that they've gone, have driven, BlackBerry and the companies out there have driven the carriers to really closer to a fixed line cost. You know what you're getting with a BlackBerry. You know what your contract is. They've cut down on the data, and I don't want you to gloss over that, because you said that that's an important piece.
I think for big multinational enterprises that have their BES infrastructure running, that is a huge important piece. Because the TCO is so much lower. I mean, you compare it to data plans on iOS and Android, right? They're all over the shop. They're carrier specific. They're not enterprise, collected in terms of aggregate pricing for a multinational across the world. And frankly, the carriers make a lot of money on iOS and Android data, right? Because obviously they don't make a lot of money on the hardware for iOS, so they want to reap back a lot of the return on the data. And clearly, without compression, it's really it's expensive for enterprises. It's quite interesting. That's as an aside. It's interesting to see some of the startups that are coming up in the compression space.
Onevo's
one of them. Wandera is another one. You talk to these guys, and they'll say the fact that the BlackBerry is struggling for us is a huge driver of our business, because who's doing compression on Android? No one, really. And they need an enterprise-grade solution. Funnily enough, and as an anecdote, when I was in my analyst days, I was down in South Africa, and I was working. I did a presentation at a fairly big CIO event in Africa that was looking at Pan Africa on behalf of an operator down there. And so there were some really big CIOs down there. And one of the Android manufacturers was up there pitching their product to the CIOs. I won't name the name, but. And it was told a good enterprise story, great device, great capability, all locked in with MDM solutions, all that sort of good stuff. I'm sure you can guess who it is. But the three questions just popped up right away, all linked. How do you compress the data? can you compress the data? Because the reason why we like BlackBerry is they compress the data. I've got a bill that came back for me. One guy had a bill, his device was stolen, corporate liable device was stolen in South Africa, turned up in Nigeria 4 days later. The bill was R1 million, so 120 grand US or something thereabouts. I forget my South African rand to US currency, but it was around that ballpark. And it was because the device was being used as a modem to communicate back to Colombia, because it was some drug cartel thing that caught it. So it's really, really weird stuff, but it was super expensive. So obviously, when you get into these other areas of the world where bandwidth is still at a premium, to compress this data is important solution for enterprises in particular. So anyway, I'm digressing, but coming back, I think that's still a value, that network architecture. So it's still a value to someone. Now the question is who, right?
So who do you think? Or you want me to say what I said last night, and you want to riff off that?
I always wonder whether a carrier would be interested in that, right? A carrier that sells mobility, solutions and wants to have some optimal, secure channel for data for enterprises. Okay, that's one piece.
The issue I see with that one is just the fact that if a single carrier takes it over, do they leave it open to everybody? Do they charge them? Do they, okay, this is ours now. This is our asset.
There's a lot of questions. It's an asset that if you're going after the multinational market, if you can get it. Obviously there's an expense here as well, but I can see that being one possibility. I don't think it's going to happen for obvious reasons. Carriers aren't. So then you think of, okay, who's a solution provider for the enterprise?
Last night we started with this, and I just said I still see BlackBerry as the perfect, the BES part as the perfect opportunity for Microsoft. And the first pushback,
secure transport, for ActiveSync, right?
Yeah,
next generation ActiveSync.
Let's go through the model, and then we'll see if it still makes sense. But there's a lot of pushback. Well, they just bought Nokia. It doesn't make sense. Okay, why would they want that? And I said, well, let's look at it from a different perspective. Let's leave the handset and OS stuff aside. We don't need that. They got Nokia, but they have some opportunities. If they pick up BlackBerry, they can actually say, we now have secure transport for email. In reality, they can deprecate EAS and say, okay, we'll leave EAS for Android and iOS, but if you buy a Windows phone, you buy a Windows Nokia device, so we won't even say Windows Phone, Windows Nokia device with ROS, you get secure transport, secure email, data compression. You get it on this great device that Nokia makes, and we're going to improve the OS faster and make it, harden a little bit. But we get at least all the BES patents and everything that goes with that. And we take the knock. So, hey, now we become a real solution provider. Now we can actually give you soup to nuts. And, to me, that makes sense. What's your take on that?
I totally think it makes sense. And also it's Microsoft into defense. It's Microsoft into federal. It's in government. It's into local markets, because, we forget that NOC investment, that architecture, country by country, BlackBerry have had to put some sweat. Into Russia, into India, where you've got legal intercept issues where you just cannot route traffic out of country. It's got to be sitting locally. This is the challenge you have in the cloud space, right? A lot of these lighting up data centers and where you put them, and making sure that you've got local data residency for regulatory purposes. So, BlackBerry have made those events. They've dealt that pain over the years. In selling to governments, but also selling in certain corners of the world where it's required. So Microsoft just gets that bang with that acquisition as well. So that's a huge platform for enterprise in particular, for them to go with the assumption, of course, is that, so if BlackBerry goes away, who then takes up the mantle of being the defense standard for mobile, right? Or the high-end security
and let's be
standard
clear,
for mobile.
Samsung wants it. There's no doubt. Samsung Knox, they absolutely want to pick up that mantle.
Sure. It's taken them a while, hasn't it, to get going on Knox, hasn't it?
It's been almost what is it, 9 months now since they announced it?
Yeah.
At least 6 months. It may be 9 months, but they're pushing hard on that. And the other piece that occurred to me when we were talking about last night, and I hadn't thought about before when I thought about this, was BlackBerry Messenger is also a neat little add in there, because they have the iOS and Android clients that are about to come out. They could hook it into their Skype Yammer piece, add 84 million kids, and other people obviously, but there's this whole culture of people they can add to this that kind of dovetails into what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you get the ability to, I guess, add, a fairly decent, mobile IM capability underlying that, to Microsoft as well, because they've never really played in that space as well. So you're right, that comes with it. To me, it's that underlying infrastructure. I think that, to me, that you can, for the enterprise, I think there is certainly a really interesting value proposition there. One of the things that you can also do with that infrastructure is you can run direct MPLS lines into that infrastructure if you're a multinational organization, which allows you to have a direct line in, and you can do some really solid performance management. You could really have a very strong control of the transport as a result, and
which makes organizations look at that again as security, performance. They've had their issues, but in reality, it's been up for 14 years now, 15 years, 1998. So it's been around a long time.
The one thing I would say, though, just quickly on that, the only thing I'm not 100% sure on, I don't know if you can jump in on this, but it's the user experience. So you compress, and on one hand that's great, but on the other hand, the user experience is driven by more and more thick client, so to speak, experience, right? Like heavy pipes, heavy bandwidth, heavy apps, heavy content, video, etc. And I don't know if the two marry, frankly. I don't know if there comes a point. I mean, secure email is great, but does it come a point when you start to say, okay, we're going to run? I mean, I think this was a technically strategic issue that BlackBerry faced when they were going to BB10. First of all, do we run the consumer experience through BES? Or will the consumer experience through BES be so, undermined in comparison to, iOS and Android that it was impossible?
Well, the question is, if you own the infrastructure and you're building your Windows Phone to deal with this, can you actually design the entrance into those pipes? So maybe if you're compressing the data, you can have more apps running at the same time. That's one of Microsoft's play. As far as being able to do that and actually get more data across smaller pipes. Because as much as we like to say the network's ubiquitous, we're actually in the hotel right now in Atlanta where Verizon doesn't work.
That is such an important point. I can't, when you start to go outside and go truly global and go into some really nascent countries worldwide,
Africa, Asia Pac, some of those places.
And you talk to BlackBerry advocates in enterprise from all over the world, and they'll tell you, the reason why I land in Kuala Lumpur or I land in Delhi and I turn on my BlackBerry and it works. It just starts. And I've tried every other device. I mean, certain devices aren't allowed, obviously. Or I'm fiddling around with my version of an Android manufactured device that that has some sort of carrier settings and carrier customization that I don't obviously recognize on my device because I'm traveling into these geographies, and it's a nightmare. So you're absolutely right on that. That aspect for if Microsoft can leverage if this materializes in your theory, we have to stress this is a theory. Right?
Definitely a theory. I have no inside knowledge whatsoever.
That I think is a huge value prop for Microsoft in a global capacity. I mean, also you marry that with Nokia's global branding and distribution and reach and point of sale capabilities externally as well. It actually makes a lot of sense. And
when you talk about moving from the Asha line of the Nokias that Microsoft has acquired as part of this and talk about moving them to smartphones, what good is a smartphone in some places in Africa, Asia Pac, or anywhere, where you don't have the data throughput. Okay, great. I have an app on here, but I can't reach the cloud behind it. So, if not Microsoft, anybody else you can think of? Because we had a lot of trouble with that.
We had this conversation. I was thinking of, I mean, Dell. Does Dell come in? I mean, then Dell. Then you say, does Dell look holistically? I mean, I would argue, obviously we're completely hypotheticalizing and speculating in this. But, Dell is probably one of the only, if we talk about Dell as a candidate, say we make a top 10 list and they're in there somewhere, Dell would be one of the few that I could see being interested in the whole thing. You know what I mean? Like these other companies that we're speculating on, I think they're going to only be interested in bits of it, right?
Well, it could also be HP, but on the other hand, we've seen how HP handles mobile acquisitions, so I don't know that I'd want them to pick it up if I really wanted to survive.
Yeah. It's I think what let's go down the path of some other options. But I think the Dell scenario, I think that's a little bit tricky. But pretty soon you're getting down to a short list, and I think what that means is as well is I think there aren't that many options out there unless the organization is structured differently. But alternatively, I think truly what's going to happen, in my personal view, is that this is all speculation. I think BlackBerry will still run, and it will run, and maybe it'll have different investor structure, and maybe there'll be strategic changes and bits will change, but it's still going to run, and I think it's going to run for some time. It makes sense for everyone. That's even if there is a potential.
Nobody
buyer.
buys it; it dies a slow death.
That's right.
But a slow death.
Right.
It's and eventually somebody will pick up some of the pieces. I don't think the patent. A lot of people say the third business for them. I alluded to when we started is the patent leg, and I don't really think their patents are there. I think they would have been defending them for a heck of a long time, and they're not. They haven't really gone against anybody for them, and we've seen what's happened with Motorola. Google bought Motorola for their patents, and hasn't really won anything with them.
Yeah.
So let's actually talk a little bit. We've good conversation about BlackBerry, but let's kind of transition and hit a tangent and actually talk a little bit about GEMA, because what's interesting about GEMA and what you guys do. I work for multinational. I work for an international company, and as I understand it, and then let's kind of dig into what you guys do. You guys are enabling mobility for multinationals from the perspective of you got all these member companies, and I think you're a joint venture. You can explain that in a second.
Sure.
But you enable a company, let's say GE, for example, and I have no idea if GE uses you. I'm using it because it's a global conglomerate based out of the U.S., but it's all over the world. And you enable them to, for example, we're going to have a project here. We're going to roll out mobile devices, whether it's iPads, whether it's Samsung tablets, whether it's Windows RT, and
and BlackBerry.
BlackBerry.
We're a global company, and the big point I think back from what we were just talking about is that BlackBerry is still a big player in the global multinational space as well, and that's not going to end anytime soon in my mind, despite the difficulties that they're having. So absolutely, and we've seen pockets of pretty solid success across our member network with BlackBerry, and that will no doubt still continue for the time being. So
complete sense. And then what you do is you guys take that and you help them deploy this solution all over the world. And I can speak knowing what we've gone through at my company, that it can be real difficult to have the same deployment, for example, in Germany, in Singapore, in Japan, in Australia, because let's take Apple for example. They don't run the same way in all these places. And we used to have this problem with servers. HP could deliver one way in Israel, had to deliver a different way in Lebanon or something else.
Exactly right.
So why don't you actually talk about what you do? Because it's really interesting to me how successful you guys are in doing what you do.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. I mean, I think it's first of all, we've been going. The Global Enterprise Mobility Alliance has been going for about 2 years. We've been formalized as an independent joint venture, so a legal entity, literally with almost a year going now. So it's still really early days in the life cycle of the alliance. What it is similar to the airline model. So the Star Alliance, the One World Alliance. You as within the airlines, you as an individual, you have a relationship with your local carrier. Okay, your local carrier takes you all over the world through a network of allegiances and alliances that they've made from a service delivery point of view to take care of you in terms of where they can, in gaps where they cannot supply you services. So what we find in mobility, and you'll no doubt attest to this, is a couple of things. I mean, first of all, the requirements that enterprises have for mobility, as we all know, have changed quite massively certainly in the last 2 years, right? And those requirements were driven by end users, clearly, okay? IT have had to, through all the forces of consumerization and other aspects, BYOD, et cetera, have had to adapt really quickly. And what we, and certainly what I saw at IDC as well, is that behind every nascent mobile strategy in an organization, there was always a specialist organization that was either consulting the company in terms of how they build a mobility strategy or how they manage their mobility needs, was either doing some implementation support locally in those countries, or even further down the path, actually doing some managed services. So on some form of recurring revenue stream with that organization, taking care of some aspects of their mobility projects and in terms of management and ongoing support. Okay, so and that pattern exists all over the world. So whether you're in the U.S., whether you're in Russia, whether you're in the U.K., whether you're in Germany, whether you're in China, there are specialists that are working with these organizations. So what we are doing effectively is bringing these specialists together that operate locally and creating a framework and a platform for them, infrastructure and processes, common MSA, common statement of work, documentation, common SLAs and service level guarantees to deliver holistic services in a local capacity to multinationals. So what does that mean? Well, you're Sanofi, or you're from a pharmaceutical company, another pharmaceutical company, say like Novartis, and your headquarter decision making is in X geography, and you want to do a number of things. You want to deploy tablets to 20,000 of your workers in 24 countries. Okay, where do you start for that? So what we do is we can help organizations deploy the devices globally in all the geographies that they can. We can locally stage and configure those devices for them. We can handle the logistics and the warranty management of those devices and provide some SLAs around that. And then importantly, beyond that, we can do a lot of the managed services. So the help desk, we can provide local language support across our network of members. We can provide same day on-site engineers locally in a lot of the geographies we work with and work within. And most importantly, I think what we also can do is provide that local technical consulting element that occurs, as you do a mobility project. You need to have guys there with you to support you in country, in local language, as you grow your strategy. So I guess the main source of competition in terms of how you look at it, because it's an interesting market in the global space, but would be, I guess, the equivalent of kind of the carriers, or perhaps the global SIs that will have a centralized model and will have to shift guys into geographies.
Well, sort of like
according to their customer demands.
I would think a competition for you would also be someone like Accenture or something like that, where we can do a local help desk. We have people who do strategy. We have people who know how to source and everything else. So, but what I find interesting is I don't see a lot of other than airlines. I don't necessarily see a lot of this. We don't see this really in cloud. We don't see this in some of the other computing areas, networking, et cetera, which is, I think, what makes this interesting. Now, how does one engage with you? Because you provide these services. Do they come to GEMA? Do they start with your partners, and the partners throw them to you, or how do I do that as a company?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it actually it's very simple. I think the common model is, because our differentiation is the fact that we leverage that local capability, and so the common model is that there's local engagement with our members. So whether our Nation Sky colleagues in China, whether it's the Vox Mobile colleagues in the U.S., they have relationships. They have go-to-market strategies in their home territories. Oftentimes, they're engaging multinationals, and effectively the pattern is that their customers start local. And then after a period of time of success, they then ask the member to go global, and in which case the member uses the alliance for international service delivery. But the model of contracting and interface and management, etc., is done in the home country through the local member, and then the other members support that member on those particular projects. So that gives us that local capability. So whether it's in Russia, we don't yet have a Russian member, but you can imagine there will be energy and oil and gas companies
Absolutely.
that are working globally. They're going to want to work in Russian, but they're going to need international delivery outside of Russia, and that's where we come in, because we have that strength and depth on a global basis. So that's one model. We also we work quite closely with AT&T as partners as well. So we help with AT&T in terms of their international delivery for mobility outside of the U.S. So we do engage on the channel side and that side. And there is a minor portion of activity that we've had in its early days in our history, where depending on the customer actually has asked GEMA collectively to be the main interface, in which case myself and some of my employees will interface and lead the project, and our members become behind the GEMA front, if you like, and do the delivery.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's very rare, because ultimately the strength with our members in the local markets that they operate.
Yeah, I mean, I love the model, and you're starting to see it, and it's kind of interesting, because we're also starting to see apps. They're trying. I could actually see you guys branching out into apps a little bit, because there are apps that say, you know what, I built myself in the U.S. or I built myself here, but people want to use this app over here, and we don't know how to deliver this service, everything else to it.
Absolutely right. I mean, supporting an app globally. I mean, a lot of these apps are, they're small companies, right? They're based somewhere in California. If you're a bank, pick one, pick HSBC, you say, for example, and you like this app, but the company's like 30 guys, and they can provide 24/7 support. That's one piece. But what happens if you want it in local language? You want to run it across 24 countries, but you don't want your entire support, and you're a bank. These apps are important applications, a lot of them, right? I mean, we're getting into the phase now. Mobile is not just email anymore, right? These are some of these apps are being used for really important things in the business. So you want the guarantees of support. So we'll do that. So we'll provide.
So you do that.
We
sort of
will
thing
do
too.
that. Yeah. So we can provide through the member network. We can provide app support, on a local basis, on a local language capacity in a 24/7 follow the sun model. And it's early days. We're seeing RFPs there.
Yep.
We're doing proof of concepts there, but we're not far before companies will say, actually, I'm going to need a service provider to provide me that support for some of these applications that I'm looking at deploying across 30,000 employees. So
now we're running out of time, and I know that you have a dinner thing, but you have to tell me you have a minute to.
I got a couple minutes. Yeah.
Okay, because I want to hit you with one more theory, because we kind of. I don't know what we were drinking last night, but even
though you gave me gave me a hard time for leaving.
We touched on a theory last night, because you mentioned that you worked with AT&T, and one of the rumors going around now is with
this one
with Vodaphone having made $135 billion.
Insane, isn't it?
With the divestment of Verizon. There's a rumor going around of what would happen if AT&T and Vodafone ended up together.
Oh, that's a massive deal, isn't it?
But what do you think? I mean,
I think anything's possible. I think
when we were talking about it last night, the thing that struck me is AT&T thinks of itself as a global company, and I may get in trouble with some of my AT&T listeners here, but it's not.
Yeah.
And this would give it a huge presence in Europe.
For mobile, you mean?
Yeah, for mobile.
Right.
So when you start looking at Europe and the opportunity to say, I have an operator here. You don't have roaming charges anymore. You don't have this other stuff, because we can do this for you now. I mean, I just see huge synergies here, and And Vodafone's huge too. I mean, Vodafone's got
it's it's even bigger now in terms of its value. Obviously, with a lot of that cash coming from Verizon. There's two ways you look at it, right? I mean, there's on one hand when the Vodafone Verizon deal happened, you're thinking, okay, that's a barrier to an AT&T Vodafone merger massively removed. But on one hand, that's also an impediment because the Vodafone's values just shot right up, right? So how's AT&T got to fund an acquisition? And I don't actually know. I don't know how it balances out between them in terms of
no
the size
idea myself either.
You know, I mean, it could very well be that Vodafone's actually a magnitude now bigger than AT&T. I honestly don't know.
And we won't debate that because we both admit we don't know.
But bringing those two together, I mean, regulatory issues pending, clearly. But you're absolutely right. That creates an absolute global behemoth. But I'm wondering if Vodafone would be interested. My view is that Vodafone is going to start to use that cash and start to go on an acquisition spree of its own. And it's going to go in. It's going to go into Africa in a more heavy hitting way, and it's going to go into some of these areas, of the emerging areas of the world, where if you start to look at Vodafone's balance sheet, you're starting to see that its growth is coming clearly from these areas of the world that are just starting to pick up in terms of mobile. And actually, it's having a struggle in certain areas of Europe, in particular, where quarter after quarter they're seeing Spain in particular, just seeing really, really pressure on the revenue. So I think that's where Vodafone will go, but at the same time, it depends on how aggressive AT&T are.
I kind of think of this, and we didn't get to this part last night. I look at like SoftBank and Sprint.
Right.
SoftBank and for those of you that don't know SoftBank, it's a Japanese telco, and I'm going to get his name wrong, but it's Masayoshi-san, is it?
Right.
And if I said it wrong, I'm going to apologize now. But very much a forward-thinking head of that company, and the stuff that he's doing with his employees. They've had iPads out for 3 years now. He uses one exclusively, and he's given one to all his employees, and they're looking at data and everything else, and people are kind of going, well, why Sprint? But there's no foothold there for Vodafone really outside of Europe. And, I see what you're saying about Africa, but I think a foothold in the U.S., look at it the other way as opposed to AT&T there, Vodafone coming this way.
Right.
Kind of interesting, that gives you...
Absolutely right.
Gives you the power then to go into Latin America and Africa.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And, that's where your growth markets are going to be.
You're right. I mean, I think the initiator of that deal, well, I guess the point I was trying to make is who is the initiator?
Don't know.
My personal view, it's AT&T, but for where they no doubt have ambition, because I think Vodafone's, I think their focus is distracted. I could be wrong. I mean, my guess. That's my guess.
We'll give you
with visibility of like a fingernail on this whole issue.
You've been out of the business for for 6 months now, so we have to give you a little bit of a pass, but.
So yeah, I think that on balance, it's Vodafone's willingness to move in that direction. I'm not sure.
Okay, you know what? I gotta let you go. I know you have a dinner meeting you have to get to, but this has been absolutely awesome. So, Nick, I want to thank you for taking the time. I know this is the first time you've done one like this, so thank you. I appreciate it. Next time we'll have alcohol with us and make it a little bit more fun. But thank you for taking the time.
No, thanks for having me. It's been wicked. Really enjoyed it. Hope to do it again soon.
We'll find a way to get you back on. And so, this wraps up another episode of the Mobilecast. This will be the last one from Atlanta. We'll have a couple coming up from San Diego, actually. The studio's moving around. But again, listeners, you have questions, comments, suggestions, please hit us up on Twitter, email, the webpage. And until next time, have fun.